Well, hello there, and welcome to another beautiful day for an adventure from the couch here on Tommy Travels the Second. And today we're just going to go with the theme of the week, which is just keeping it light. No heavy night chats about scary topics, just fun things. And what could be more fun than comedy? And that is what we're going to talk about tonight. Some of my very favorite comedians of all time. So if you are brand new to this channel, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on a thing. And I will see you right after this. Now, with a list like this, most people would do some type of a countdown to the number one spot. And you have to stay tuned the whole time to find out who owns that number one place. And I am not going to do that because I've seen too many lists like this where they build all that tension. And especially with comedian lists, it's always the same two people, Richard Pryor and George Carlin. Not necessarily in that order. So I'm just going to get that right out of the way up front. So now, through the rest of the video, you really have no idea who I'm going to mention, and I kind of like that better. And before I move on to the rest of the comedians on this list, I do want to talk about the top two, which would be Richard Pryor and George Carlin. And Richard Pryor, you got to give him respect. The man was brought up in a brothel, basically. That's where he spent his childhood years, seeing unspeakable things. And how he managed to kind of get from that scenario into becoming the best, brightest, most hilarious comedian of all time, I'll never know how one goes through that kind of a metamorphosis in their life. Now, he did have problems with drugs and things like that, which led to probably the best stand-up set I've ever seen in my entire life. When he was in, I think it was Live on the Sunset Strip, where he was wearing that red suit and he was talking about the whole experience of being burned, and that whole thing was absolutely probably the best stand-up comedy I've ever seen in my life. Just because it was so honest. It came from a place of pain, but he turned it into laughter. And when I saw that, I was like, there's a guy who knows how to do this. I am not worthy. I'm not worthy. And the first time that I heard George Carlin do his football versus baseball bit, I was hooked. That was the most brilliant thing. And you can tell that he puts a lot of thought into every single word, every punctuation mark, every inflection in his voice. You know, and I can't quote him word for word. I don't know it that well, and it's been a long time since I've seen it. But when he does the football is played on a gridiron, a battlefield where the goal and the objective is to throw long bombs, and he does all that, goes through this whole thing about football, and then he goes, and baseball is played in a park. You know, just a park. It's just, I can't do it justice at all. But it's absolutely, I was just laughing so hard when I heard that. And then the way he just approaches topics, you know, like when people are talking about recycling and everything like that and how bad plastic is, there's that bit where he's like, the Earth has been around for billions of years. It's survived volcanoes and asteroids and dinosaurs. It's been through an ice age, and it's been through all of these things. And we think a few plastic bags are going to take it out. It's awesome. And he just bit after bit after bit like that. He just cracks me up. And I think that's why a lot of people put him way up there at the top of the list for best comedian of all time. It's because he puts so much work into his material and how he delivers it, and he's very deserving of that honor to be up there in the top two and even one on some lists. He deserves that as well. So now, who am I going to talk about next? You have no idea. And if you want to find out who else I'm going to talk about after this person, you have to stay tuned because you never know who I'm going to bring up. That's kind of what I like about this video. And so the next person, Steve Martin, makes the list. Holy cow. When I was a little kid, he was my number one inspiration. My brother had an 8-track tape of his. That's how long ago it was. I would hear Steve Martin going through some of his bits, and he'd be going through it, and he'd be like, I'm a wild and crazy guy. It wasn't on that particular thing, but that's what it was. That was the experience of listening to him on 8-track. But oh my goodness, I had his stuff memorized as a kid. He was the first person that I ever thought, I would like to do this. This is what I would love to be able to do what he can do. And that kind of inspired me in the direction of comedy later on in life. And his show, absolutely unbelievable, and he was one of the first people, comedians-wise, to start selling out whole stadiums, like football stadiums. And comedians sold out clubs, they could sell out some theaters, some pretty big venues, but Steve Martin was really one of the first rock star comedians out there, because his timing was impeccable with breaking out in comedy and showing up at Saturday Night Live at the same time. Those two just magically worked together, because those first couple seasons of Saturday Night Live had the whole country captivated, and my gosh. And then he spread out into a whole movie career with The Jerk, and The Man with Two Brains were some of his early movies. The Jerk is still a classic to this day. And then Roxanne, I loved that movie where he plays the fireman with the big nose, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with John Candy, one of my favorite movies. Absolutely unbelievable career, and still going strong today, doing a show with his great friend Martin Short, which reminds me of The Three Amigos, another great movie that he's in. He is just a comedian's comedian. I saw him on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. He was great on that as well. And I just can't say enough good things about Steve Martin. So he is definitely way up there on the list for me as well. And the next person on my list is somebody who had a very sad and tragic ending to his life, but everything before that was very captivating and entertaining for all, and quite hilarious. And of course, I'm talking about Robin Williams. And I remember all the way back when he started on Mork and Mindy to see the improv that he would do on that show, and you could tell that he was improvising, and that Pam Dauber, who played Mindy, that her laughter was real, because I think they just turned the cameras on sometimes and let him just fly off. I'm sure they had some lines written for him, but a lot of times they just took whatever he would give them as well. And it turned out so well, and that's why that show was such a success. And then his career just skyrocketed from there. In the world of comedy, I think comedians are in awe still to this day, looking back at his sets, at how well he could just go off on tangents just from one little thing. I remember seeing a show where a lady gave him her scarf, and then he went and did about 6 different characters with that scarf. And just one as funny as the next. And I believe that show he was introduced, because he wasn't really, really famous yet. He was introduced by none other than Richard Pryor. And Richard Pryor said, yeah, I was at a show with this guy one time, and he said, come on up, why don't we do some improv? And then I just stood there for about 15 minutes while he just went off. So even Richard Pryor had a lot of respect for him. And if Richard Pryor can give the props out to Robin Williams, then he deserves to be way up high on this list as well. And then his movie career with Aladdin, they pretty much just let him stand behind the microphone and say what he wanted to say, and made the characters fit whatever words he was mouthing out, because they were hilarious. And so between that, and he had serious movies like Awakenings and Cadillac Man, and he had this one, I think it was called Photomat, where he played a real creeper character. But then he'd go off and do Peter Pan in Hook, and do Mrs. Doubtfire, and he just had a whole range. He was a Juilliard trained actor, and one of the most talented people of our generation. I say Robin Williams was one of the most talented people of our generation as far as comedy and acting, but one of the most talented people in the generation before him was his idol, his inspiration, Jonathan Winters. My gosh, I was a little young to be able to appreciate his career as he was going through it. I remember my dad loved Jonathan Winters a lot. He was a big fan, but I didn't really get to be a big fan of his until he showed up on Mork and Mindy, for one thing, but then also seeing his career, his old stuff that he did years later through YouTube. And if you haven't seen some of Jonathan Winters lately, or you're not really sure about how good he actually was, just, search his name on YouTube and you'll see quite a few videos, and they are all just absolutely hilarious. And he was the one that showed Robin Williams basically how improv is done. That's how Robin Williams got his inspiration. And he was known for going on to Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson would just give him a hat. And he'd go into a character, he'd just put on a baseball hat and be like, well, shoot, I'm this guy now. And then he'd give him another hat and he'd be like, oh, I'm this guy now. And just absolutely funny. And then he would be on the Celebrity Roast. He did one where he roasted Frank Sinatra. That's who he roasted. And he just came out from backstage and acted like he was the bus driver for Frank Sinatra and went into this whole story that was absolutely hilarious and had everybody just rolling in laughter. And somebody that usually doesn't show up on these lists, but on mine, he is right up there as well. And guess who's next on my list?
Hey, I tell ya, I don't get no respect, I tell ya. I went to put on my underwear this morning. The Fruit of the Loom guys started giggling.
That's right, it's Rodney Dangerfield. And he goes on the list just for the fact that I called up a station locally here in town, Cool 108, which was a 50s station, and they were giving away a trip to Las Vegas for different reasons every day, having something to do with Vegas. But this particular day, it was whoever could do the best Rodney Dangerfield impression. And I called in, did my impression, and I happened to win a trip for two to Las Vegas. And so that was a blast. And who doesn't love Rodney Dangerfield? From all of his hilarious one-liners to Caddyshack and just his personality, his demeanor. You just can't not love Rodney Dangerfield. And just about everybody has an impression of him as well. I do. But I've seen a lot of people who can't even do impressions that are so like, hey, I tell ya. Because they love Rodney Dangerfield, and he was so hilarious. And so, with great affection, Rodney Dangerfield makes this list. And then, of course, there's Eddie Murphy. I mean, when this guy was in his prime, he was on the top of the world. He was 19 years old and on Saturday Night Live. And he single-handedly saved that show. Because before that, they had pretty much fired the entire cast, and it was on the brink of being canceled altogether. And then he came on the show and revitalized it by creating characters that America fell in love with. Like Buckwheat. Okay. And then Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood. Hilarious. The James Brown bit. Sitting in a hot tub. I'm gonna get wet. Yeah. That was awesome. How to be a hoe. I mean, everything he did on that show was absolutely amazing. And then he did that one sketch, well, not really a sketch, but an actual film that they do. And he pretended to be a white guy and put on the white makeup and everything, and then went around town, and he went into a little convenience store to buy a paper, and the guy looks around and says, no, it's free. Go ahead. And he gets on the bus, and it's one big party, and I mean, unbelievable. And then his stand-up comedy, when he did Delirious, my gosh, that was hilarious. With the aunt throwing the shoe, and the ice cream man. and all of the things. Black family walks into a house, if it's haunted and they hear, "Get out." They're like, "Bye, too bad we can't stay." Everything about that was funny, and I think it's probably one of the most imitated comedy routines, or at least not imitated, but stolen from sometimes outright when you watch comedians of today try to come up with original bits, but they're really hearkening back to that particular stand-up routine from Delirious that Eddie Murphy came out with way back when. So he has definitely left his mark in the comedy world, not only in that, but in all of his movies, Beverly Hills Cop movies, and then, of course, the Nutty Professor movie where he plays just about every character, and Coming to America where that playing multiple characters kind of got his start for him, and absolutely amazingly talented. Eddie Murphy, ladies and gentlemen. Now this list is really just for comedians, like stand-up comedians only. However, I do want to give a shout out to two of the funniest women in the country in my memory, and that is Lucille Ball and Carol Burnett. My gosh, those two, the talent that they had. And Lucille Ball broke the door wide open for Carol Burnett to be able to do her show, and I'm so glad that happened, because there are people, including myself, who still laugh at those clips today on YouTube from that old show. My gosh, when Carol Burnett came down with that huge dress, and somebody said, "I like your dress," and she says, "Well, something I found in the window." You know, the dress was a big curtain rod. Awesome TV. And those two inspired the next person on the list, which is Ellen DeGeneres. And my gosh, she is successful, and she deserves every bit of it, because she didn't just, this wasn't handed to her, right? She started out in comedy way back in the day with Seinfeld and Leno and all of those guys. Her first appearance was on Johnny Carson, so she goes way back there. And for her to go through and be that successful, every comedy bit that I've seen from her has been absolutely hilarious. She's still inventive, and now she's got her own daytime talk show, and she just kind of took some inspiration from Oprah to take over that time slot, but she didn't turn her show into Oprah. She turned it into her own thing, and it is absolutely a breath of fresh air compared to what talk shows used to be during the day. And so for that, Ellen DeGeneres gets a big hearty congratulations for making the list. You certainly do deserve it. And the last person that we are going to highlight this evening is another Saturday Night Live alum who made it a show that you could not miss, or at least I couldn't anyway, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Dana Carvey. And I always wanted to see what character he was going to do next, because he basically taught me all of my impressions. Like George Bush, "Not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture." Or Ross Perot, "Can I finish? Can I finish? Can I finish? Can I finish?"
I'm Tom Brokaw.
Just everything he did, I could figure out how to do it. And I don't know if it's his voice or exactly why I pick up so well on when he does an impression, I can figure it out. But it works for me. I just loved his work. And he was another person that made Saturday Night Live really entertaining during the time that he was on. And his stand-up comedy is great. He always makes me laugh. You guys, if you haven't seen a Dana Carvey stand-up or anything like that, it's something that you should check out. But mostly I love him for teaching me all of those impressions. So thank you very much, Dana Carvey. You have made the list. Well, you guys, this has been another successful adventure here on Tommy Travels the Second. And one other person I just want to shout out is Louis Anderson. I actually met him. I've done stand-up comedy with him a few different times during my career. Such a nice guy. His comedy is absolutely clean and funny. And if you haven't checked out Louis Anderson or seen his stand-up, just Look him up on YouTube. There's plenty of clips on there, and you will find that he is quite hilarious indeed. So I want to give him a little plug as well. And then, if you guys liked what you saw here today, go ahead and hit like on my YouTube channel. While you're at it, go ahead and hit subscribe and the little bell notification next to it so you can be the first to know when a new adventure comes out. Thank you guys so much for the support that you've given me so far. And until next time, I hope to catch you on the flip side.